The Texans go into Indianapolis and grind out a win. We're going to talk about that and more on this edition of The Bullpen.
To throw the punches away. He floats one wide open, and there he goes. Tagged down for a Texan touchdown.
Hello and welcome to The Bullpen. As always, I am James Roy, and with me is my trusty co-host, Tom Chavarria. Tom, 1 week of football in the books. How do you feel?
It was Christmas Day, Christmas morning. We got the season started, everything ready to go. I mean, I had all the fantasy stuff, whether it be daily or season long, best ball draft. I had all kinds of things to look at. Got to do the game. Really excited to talk about it. It was a lot of fun.
I'm excited. I have some mixed reactions to my different fantasy leagues. I say I'm about 50-50 on how I'm doing, but I'm excited. It's a victory Monday. It gives us even more reason to be excited. Before we really get into it, you're talking about fantasy football. Next week is the start of the Locker League, the Bullpens League on Locker. It is a new format of fantasy football. Best way to describe it, it's like predictive sports trivia. Test your knowledge of how well you know the Texans, because this league is specifically for the Texans, against other Texans fans. Make sure you sign up. The link is in the bio on all my socials, and you don't even need the link. You can just go search up the Locker app and download it, and then search up the Bullpen, and we'll pop up. If you use code KICKOFF, you get matched up to $100 when you deposit, and it is $25 for the league. And this is the Bullpen. You're listening to it or watching it, so you probably know that. But just in case you didn't, this is a Houston Texans podcast where Tom and I like to, have fun, hang out, and talk about the Texans. So if that's what you're into, this is the place. We do recaps, previews, and we have a live episode most weeks in the middle of the week. And so if you want to interact with us, that's what we're here to do. Talk to you. Talk to each other about the Texans. So make sure you're tuned in wherever you get podcasts at. With that in mind, let's talk about this Victory Monday. We're just going to start right in with the offense. And I want to ask you this right off the bat. CJ Stroud, would you say that his performance in this game met expectations? Maybe he looked a little rusty. Like, what is your impression of CJ Stroud in this game?
I think that entirely depends on what your bar was. Some people have this insanely high bar for CJ Stroud, and that's totally understandable. I thought this was a pretty solid game from the construct of what they were trying to do offensively. I mean, when you have a running game that was as dominant as the Texans were, there's no need to throw it all over the yard. And I think if you look at his stat line and you basically break it down, he was very efficient, very accurate. And I mean, I know like maybe the 230 yards isn't sexy, but I mean, he got everything he wanted, I feel like.
It'll get the job done. I mean, 230 yards is not what you want to see I don't know. With the Cowboys watched Dak Prescott throw for 179 yards and a touchdown after paying him $60 million a year. I feel like that's a far more disappointing performance. And I think that when you look at the 115 passer rating, a few touchdowns, distributed the ball really well. I think honestly, my bar for gauging CJ Stroud's performance was going to be how he did with as many weapons as we added this offseason, distributing the ball and making sure everyone got fed. And I mean, even Xavier Hutchinson got a catch in this game. So I think that all in all, I like what CJ was able to put on the field. And I think that performing at that level for the rest of the season might be a little disappointing in terms of like where the stats were. But I think that for a first game in his sophomore season, shaking the rust off, getting back out there after his first off season in the NFL, I thought it was a really good performance. And I think that it leaves room for improvement, which is great for me. But you spoke to Joe Mixon. I mean, that's probably the reason why it wasn't as statistically impressive as it could have been, was that the Texans are, at least over the last year, not used to having a running back that they can go to and go, hey, we're going to feed you the ball. Just let it rip. We need you to get as many all-purpose yards as possible. Just make it happen. And then he does it. Joe Mixon, 160 rushing yards, got himself a touchdown. Really, in moments where it felt like last year the Texans might have let the game go or not been able to manage the clock correctly, Joe Mixon's performance, I think, really kept the Texans, gave them that competitive edge that they needed. How did you feel about Joe Mixon's performance today?
I mean, it exceeded anything I had for him. I didn't think they would run the ball 30 times with him. I think
No,
that's
yeah.
really impressive. I don't see that going forward. However, this just really gives you very complimentary football, what all the coaches like to talk about, to be able to have the balance with the run game and the pass game. It truly makes it impossible to defend. When you look at what the Texans were able to do, they basically, towards the end of that game, just told the Colts, we're going to run the football down your throat, and there's nothing you can do about it. And it wasn't just him. Like, when you look along all the rushes for the team, everybody had really good totals. Dameon Pierce, who was, caught all kinds of flack, had 3 carries, had 16 yards. If I told you before this game that Dameon Pierce was going to average 5 yards a carry, even if it was 1 carry, I guarantee you there'd been an army out there going, there's no way, sir. Get out of here. And he did. He looked really good. He had a couple really good runs, which is a credit to the offensive line, which I thought was awesome. The Stephon Diggs went out of his way to talk about that in his postgame. Just a dominant performance from Mixon. And it really makes it scary, because if you're going to load the box up to stop a guy like that, that's when you're going to see CJ put up some monster numbers.
Now, it's funny you bring that up, because Mina Kimes actually at one point in the game tweeted out that on 14 of the 16 rushes that the Texans had to that point, that Joe Mixon was met with a light box. So the passing game and the threat of CJ Stroud set Joe Mixon up for success, and it now creates this kind of pick your poison thing for teams moving forward, where they have to decide, do you want the Texans to run it down your throat, or do you want to test your ability to defend CJ Stroud making these absolutely ridiculous throws? And I mean, I don't know. If I'm an opposing defensive coordinator, I'm in a rock and a hard place. I just don't really have anywhere to go with it. Now, you brought up the offensive line. Obviously, the light boxes probably helped, but Kenyon Green in particular, as a run blocker, rated out through PFF at a 72.5. This is one of those things, I've said it before, but I'll clarify here before we talk any further about it. I believe in PFF as something that confirms what you see on the field. So with that in mind, do you believe that this PFF grade confirms what you saw from Kenyon Green on the field?
Absolutely. I thought Kenyon Green, up until a boneheaded false start play late in the game, had a phenomenal game. Like there were monster holes in the middle of that line, and it was really fun to watch, because this is a guy, much like Derek Stingley a couple of years back, who, the bust label had been thrown around, and I thought he was just a young guy that needed some time to season a little bit, and now you're starting to see it. And now the left guard position goes from an area of weakness to an area of strength.
I couldn't agree more. I felt like, especially in the run, the offensive line picked it up. And last season, it felt like the offensive line could kind of put together a pocket, but just wasn't able to create any run lanes. And I think that there's maybe this combination, because as you said earlier, Dameon Pierce did average 5 yards a carry on his 3 carries. He had 16 yards. But there's some combination of having a starting running back with vision like Joe Mixon and the offensive line improving that set up what the Texans were able to do on the ground. So it's incredible to see. Now to speak to the offensive line's performance in pass protection, it maybe wasn't the best in terms of when you look at CJ Stroud getting sacked a few times. Just generally speaking, the pocket didn't seem very at peace. And that also may have contributed to CJ Stroud maybe not having this monster 300-yard game that everyone wanted to see from him. What do you attribute that to as far as the Texans' pass blocking goes?
The one thing that I constantly noticed that kind of made me wonder was the turf. You saw guys slipping and sliding all over the turf. And I imagine going backwards trying to hold a block is really, really hard when your footing is not there. I could be making an excuse for the guys. This could be credit to Indy's ability to rush off the edge. They were able to get home 4 times. And you, like you said, there was never just a really peaceful pocket. It just seemed like there was just so much chaos that CJ had to navigate. And credit to CJ, he made some amazing throws. He made some amazing escapes throughout the game. When the pocket collapsed on him and he had to scramble, he bought time when he needed to. And he just really showed how he's really elite. I mean, there was the play from his knees to Brevin Jordan for 2 yards, which would have been a 5-yard loss and a sack that he was able to make. And it's just like, I don't know how you teach that. Like there's only a handful of quarterbacks in the league. They're going to have the wherewithal to know where their tight end is to be able to get that ball away. And CJ was able to do it.
100%. I think that we spoke to it last season about how impressive it was that CJ was able to perform so well under pressure. So it should come as no surprise that the offensive line maybe not having their best pass pro day didn't exactly deter him from having what is a very solid game to start the season. But I do agree that the turf probably was a huge reason for that. Having tried to pass protect before on turf that wasn't great. If you can't plant yourself, you're set up to slide. It's going to be hard to stay in front of the guy. So, yeah, I mean, nothing else to it. Now, speaking to your point that you made about some of the throws CJ made, it's hard to talk about this game without bringing up Nico Collins. Now, Nico Collins, I believe, in this game alone has just kind of foreshadowed that this deal that the Texans gave him is going to be worthwhile. Now, I was never a person to doubt that in my mind. I've been saying all offseason that Nico Collins is the wide receiver one. Do you think that that's what we should take out of this game, or do you think that we're still in the process? We're kind of trying to decide, which game is which receiver's dominant game based off the game plan. Like, do you think that we can pretty confidently say that we should expect to see Nico up there in the numbers game in and game out?
I really think that much like the light box, pick your poison type thing with Mixon, I think you're going to see secondaries and you're going to see defensive coordinators try to take Nico Collins away, and all that's going to do is open up opportunities for Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell. I don't believe that it's going to be Nico and everyone else. I think it's going to be week to week. You're going to have a hard time figuring out who is the stud. Next week, Diggs could go for 8 catches and 100 yards, and Nico could catch 2 touchdowns and have 50 yards reception. It could be Tank Dell. I mean, we didn't see hardly anything from the tight ends. It could be one of them. And the one thing that I can't wait to see, the one thing that I kind of looked forward to see today that we didn't get was Joe Mixon in the passing game. He had 3 catches for 19 yards, but I just felt like they could have threw to him so much more. There were a couple of plays that I thought CJ went bigger. He had the check down. He was right there wide open. And he's just like, nope. I see something, further down the field. And I think if you get Joe Mixon out into space with the football, it's just asking for trouble. So I really hope that we get to that point. And Mixon could have a 100-yard receiving day. So who knows?
I couldn't agree more. But with that in mind, I do intend every week to give the who's on track for 1,000 yards receiving. And so far this season, the only receiver on the Texans that is tracking for 1,000 yards on the season is Nico Collins, which I mean is not a bad thing. It's one game, obviously, so I'm not trying to paint some sort of mystery narrative that deters. I'd like to see all the wide receivers succeed, and I think that brings up an important point, which is that I feel like every single receiver in that receiving core, at least in the big three, succeeded. It was a successful game in a lot of ways. I think the only one that you could say maybe was less than what you expected is Tank Dell. But even then, in the way that Tank Dell was used, I felt like it was a very successful game. Would you agree, like looking at what Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell did, that like in general, the big three had a successful game?
I really think that they're the focus. Like when we look at the target share, you had Nico with 8, Tank with 7, Steph Diggs with 6. I think that's where the ball's going to start. And then, obviously you're going to have Joe get some, Dalton get some, X, Brevin Jordan, Dare. Those guys are all going to be involved. But I think it was good to see that it was very equal, and they spoke to it in the preseason that, everybody's going to eat. And, when your big play comes, your big play comes. And that's really what I look at when I see this game. I saw, right out of the bat, first play, first drive. He, tries to get Tank Dell involved, and then it just kind of branched out. Now, Nico had the big plays, but Steph Diggs scored all the touchdowns. So it's like everybody found their role, and I think everybody was happy at the end of the day. And I think that's really the important thing for CJ is to make sure that he's keeping all these guys happy and fed. And he did a really good job.
100%. And you spoke to it, right? Stephon Diggs was targeted 6 times, and he caught every single pass that was thrown his way. Every other receiver, I believe, had a drop or at least a ball that was not on target throughout the game. But Stephon Diggs, 100% catch rate, which is incredible to see. I also liked seeing him get both touchdowns. I don't know what it was about it, but And it also kind of plays into my storybook ending because he, even though it wasn't at the last second, he did get the touchdown that put the Texans up for good. So I'm going to go ahead and take credit for that one. My first semi-successful storybook ending to start the season. So pretty excited about that. One last question before we kind of move away from the offense into the defense. Looking at the inactives for the game, John Mechie and Cam Akers were not active. Now, do you think there's any reason to be concerned about that? Is that just those guys are just inactive for no reason? Like, what do you make of that?
I don't make anything of it. I think really when you look at this team and how deep it is, you're going to have that. I really think that those guys are in a position to play if there's an injury. And if there's not, it's a good problem to have. You got more than enough guys. You look at who they kept active, and they all had a little versatility to them. So British Brooks got to start, then made a great play on special teams. Like, that's what I think it's going to take to be able to not be a replacement for an injured guy. You're going to have to be able to do some stuff on special teams. You're going to have to be able to affect the game in other ways. So if that means Cam Akers doesn't see, an activation till week 4 or whatever, I don't have a problem with it. I mean, I know he was a star in the preseason, and I know John Mechie, we kind of look for him to make that next leap. But at the same time, if right now you're 100% healthy, and I believe they came out of the game pretty healthy, and those guys just right now we don't have a role for them, I don't see a problem with carrying them inactive and just keeping them in the game plan that way. I saw Mechie on the sideline, every score, every wide receiver huddle, he was there. So he's definitely in tune and involved.
Yeah. I mean, at first I was wondering about it, but when you look at the usage, and I mean, coming out of the preseason, as much as both of them had good preseasons, when you look at usage and where the depth chart lied, it would the writing was on the wall. But I still can't say I was like not surprised because I kind of expected them to be active. But, with Xavier Hutchinson, I believe he got like 1 target for 2 yards. I don't know what John Mechie was going to do to separate himself from that. So, and with Xavier Hutchinson's, like you said, speaking to his versatility as like a jet sweep guy, you kind of look at it and go, okay, well, I guess it is what it is. But let's move into the defensive discussion now. Throughout the game, I felt like the offense was pretty good. There was points where the offensive line performance, whether it was because of the turf or whatever it was, kind of felt like it maybe got in the way a little bit. But at the end of the day, the Texans offense moved the ball effectively and they did their job. They got enough points to come out with a win. As far as the defensive side of the ball goes, I would say that they were tested in a way that I think we kind of predicted throughout our discussions this offseason. We talked about how vital it would be for the pass rush to be there, for the pass rush to make it easier on the other layers of the defense when it came to defending. But maybe there was a little bit of a wrinkle to it. Now, we talked pre-show, and I kind of want you to walk everyone through this because I felt like you stated it really well. But why do you think it is that it kind of felt like the pass rush was there, but it wasn't like there?
Well, I believe it had a lot to do with the type of assignment the pass rush had. Normally, the idea is, get to the quarterback as fast as you can, bring this quarterback to the ground, whatever the case may be. I really think they were used in a way in which it was more to contain Anthony Richardson. You look at guys like Lamar Jackson and Anthony Richardson and some of these really mobile quarterbacks. Ideally, what they want to do is get to the outside and then become a runner. I believe that both Daniil Hunter and Will Anderson were doing a really good job bracketing every time anything Anthony Richardson wanted to do to the outside, forcing him in the pocket, forcing him through the middle if he was going to run the football. You saw it in Mario Edwards' sack. You saw it in Foley Fatukasi's sack, that once they forced him center, then that gave them an opportunity to make a play. Or if he gets to the outside, now it's a foot race, and that guy's pretty fast. Built in a lab, they said, out of college. So I really think while it wasn't a sexy stat line for any of the edge rushers, I think the goal was to keep Anthony Richardson in the pocket as a passer or funnel him through the center so that you had, gang tackling and reinforcements. And they just did a really good job of it, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's why I like, obviously the interior defensive line got sacks, and it felt like to some extent that Anthony Richardson was held down, but then you watched him have time to make these like deep throws, and you're like, well, was the pass rush really there? So I think that's a really good explanation of what happened. I think that when you look at it through that lens, the Texans pass rush did its job. Now to that point, that meant that there was some expectation of the linebacker group and the secondary to play pass defense whenever Anthony Richardson dropped back. And for the most part, it felt like that happened pretty well, but there was quite a few plays. Now, you've heard me talk very poorly about Jalen Petrie, and one of the points that I made was that it just takes one play. All it takes is one play, one mistake in the secondary, and all of a sudden it's 60 yards and a touchdown, and the game is different, right? Obviously, the Texans have Anthony Richardson's deep ball miscues to thank for winning this game in some way, because there was a couple of deep balls that were definitely touchdowns that he missed on. But what do you make of the second? Particularly, we'll start with the secondary. What do you make of the secondary's performance, given they were asked to step up and actually cover? And in the end, while they mostly did their job, it kind of felt like they fell short in some ways.
So I really felt like the cornerback group didn't have the best day. I really felt like Stingley could have made a couple more plays. I think he let guys go, two safeties when there was no one, there was no reason to let them go. And obviously, when you don't play a lot in the preseason with some of these safeties due to injury and whatnot, I'm sure there's probably communication errors in that, the fact that they just don't get enough time on the field together. Kamari Lassiter, he let Adonai Mitchell go on a play. Luckily, there was a missed throw and a penalty. But I mean, for all intents and purposes, if Anthony Richardson was accurate, Adonai Mitchell should have had 2 touchdowns and probably 100 yards. So I do feel like you can look at the secondary as a whole and say, look, they've got to be cleaner. They've got to be better. If they're passing off guys, they have to communicate that better. But for me, it seemed like in every instance where they let guys go, and there was no one in that area that they were supposed to cover. So you really were just, I guess, playing your zone, where I felt like there was a lot of man being played. And obviously, if you're going to make the mistakes, you hope you win the game so you can watch the film and then it's not costing you anything. I feel like in the grand scheme, the win was the most important thing. On the road, tough environment. Those guys were highly motivated. Was it perfect? No. Did they get it done? Absolutely. So that's the perfect scenario. If you're going to make the mistakes, at least you do enough so that it's not costing you the game.
100%. And so, with that in mind, I kind of look towards the safety group, because a lot of those deep plays that the Alec Pierce stuff was across the middle. On the first one, Derek Stingley was there, and then like you said, he kind of let him go to Ward, who was already burned. He was toast, and that set up that first major play. But in general, a lot of it was targeted at Jimmy Ward. Jimmy Ward and at the safeties in general. What do you make of Jimmy Ward's performance? Do you feel like it was just a couple of poor plays, or like he was in the right place and the receiver just got the better of him? What do you make of that?
I mean, obviously you want him to make those plays, so you can definitely look to him and go, look, this is why they paid you. This is why they extended you. At the same time, I feel like they really defend as a unit, and I get it. I get your concern being that it's in the middle of the field, but again, I really lean on the fact that these guys just didn't spend a lot of the preseason together. I imagine there's going to be a little rust. So this kind of looked like that. Credit to Anthony Richardson. He made a couple of crazy throws. The first one to Alec Pierce was literally just an absolute heave. And, when you look at some of the throws that CJ missed today, there was one to Tank Dell. If he makes a similar throw, if he didn't underthrow him, maybe we're talking about Tank Dell having a monster day. And Anthony Richardson's just got a cannon. Like the dude just said, all right, he's down there somewhere, and he threw it further than anybody else down there. Yeah. So I think while we can be hypercritical of the secondary because plays weren't made, there were some really, really good plays made by the Colts. And you hope that that's teachable, keep it moving. You got Chicago, and you do better with Chicago.
Yeah. Well, last question on the secondary. What are your thoughts on Kalen Bullock's interception and his usage relative to, say, Eric Murray, who seemed to get also a comparable amount of play time?
I really think, he's as advertised. Coming out of college, he was a ball hawk. And game one, ball hawk, interception. He went out, he basically ran the route and made a diving play, a phenomenal play. I think that if he's going to be the safety that they groom to be the other safety, if potentially Jalen Petrie's just a nickel corner going forward, I think it's incredibly good. Like they have a great foundation to build on, and I think you saw a lot of guys talk to it. All the pieces are kind of there. So credit to Nick Caserio. I know some guys earlier today wanted to call him the player of the game because all the players he went out and got just balled out today. Like every move he made was literally like Nick's sitting in the suite just going, "Yep, that was me. I did that.
I drafted that guy.
I did that. I traded for him. I traded for him." Like Nick had a good day.
100%. Let's look at the linebacker room. And the first question I want to say is that I feel like Henry To'oTo'o heard some of the whispers and decided that he was going to be better than what people thought he could be. It felt like he was all over the place in the backfield, making tackles, playing at least half decent pass coverage. What did you think of his performance today?
I thought he looked good. I thought he looked quick. I know recently he came out in an interview and said last year he was incredibly too heavy, so he lost some weight, and now he's moving around better. And we're going to need Henry To'oTo'o to be really good for this Texan team, because the linebacker group, if I have to pick a group that I think is the biggest cause for a concern, alarm, it's probably there just because I don't see the depth. Obviously, you've got Azeez Al-Shaair, who played phenomenal today. I thought he was really good, but then without Christian Harrison there, which you kind of expect, you look at some of the other linebackers and you're just like, I don't love them. Like they're serviceable, but I don't love them. I think Henry To'oTo'o can be better. He's got the pedigree, and we just hope that, going forward, Miko's able to groom him and turn him into Blake Cashman light, maybe. We'll see.
100%. And speaking of D'Amico's proteges and friends in the linebacker room, you spoke to him earlier, Azeez Al-Shaair. How did you feel like he did in coverage? It felt like a lot was asked of him, and I mean there were some plays that went over his head, but I don't know if it was necessarily his fault that happened. How did you feel about him in coverage?
I think he's the best coverage linebacker on the team. I think he did a really good job. I know the play you're speaking to, which again, a corner let a dude go across the middle, and it's like you're asking a linebacker to take a wide receiver across the middle. I don't think that's entirely fair. He did a great job. It was just one of the few really good throws by Anthony Richardson. It ended up at a touchdown. I think if you go back and we're going to look at the tape, or did one of the stressing or blessing reviews of the tape, maybe there's a guy in coverage that probably was supposed to be there and wasn't. But all in all, I thought he played really well.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I feel like just overall on the defense, once again, to reiterate, the pass rush being like this next week against the Bears, when the pass rush is, I don't even know if it's a different assignment, honestly. I just feel like it's just, if it's possible, not as good of a quarterback. I mean, Caleb Williams excels when he's creating outside of the pocket. So the question is, do you want to keep him inside of the pocket and make him make throws there? Or I don't know, but that's a topic for a whole nother episode of the podcast. We'll talk about that soon enough. But overall, like once the pass rush gets the ability to just do what it's meant to do and just get in there and get after the quarterback, I think that we'll see the coverage not need to do as much and therefore just be better at what they do. But one last thing before we kind of bring this thing to an end, there was a blocked punt in this game, and special teams in general was just pretty, I mean, I don't know. There wasn't really anything that jumped off the page. There was that nice play by British Brooks, but what do you make of the blocked punt? Do you think it's a trend? Do you think it's just an isolated thing? Like, what did you see on that play?
I really think it was an isolated thing. I think really, Indy sent the house because of the sack that came right before it. So they were in a position where they were kind of backed up a little bit. I think it was blocked correctly. It came off the edge. That's just got to get out of there quicker. I think if you ask Tommy Townsend, he'd probably take ownership on that. I mean, I think that's really just, being quicker to get rid of the football, knowing that there's an extra guy in the box, that sort of thing. Luckily, it hurt the Texans, but it didn't kill them because they weren't able to convert the 2-point conversion, and that 2 points ended up being the difference in the game. So really, really hope that that's the last time we're talking about special teams. I think Frank Ross is one of the best special team coaches in the league, and I think we might be talking about a kick return before we're talking about another block punt.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I don't think there's much to it. It happens. It's field position. Yeah. Is there anything else you have to say about this game before we put this victory Monday in the rearview mirror and look ahead to the home opener against Chicago?
I did not know, and I don't know if you or the rest of the people know, that was the 9th consecutive road win against a division opponent. So the Texans are taking care of business within the division in their building, and that's 9 in a row. That's an amazing stat for me. I think it's really hard to go into a division rival's house and go get a dub because we see them all the time, so they kind of know what to expect. So it's always, those games are always more competitive. They just are because you play 2 a year against that team. To say that the Jags, Titans, the Colts have lost 9 in a row, that's a pretty awesome stat.
If I was a Titans or Jaguars fan, I would read that. If I'm a Titans or Jaguars season ticket holder, I would read that as sell tickets for the game against the Texans. Go ahead and take the free money because people are going to pay a lot more to go see the Texans in your stadium, and go ahead and try, save yourself the heartache. That's what I heard. I think I heard that along with the stat that the Colts have not won a home opener not a home opener, but a season opener. And this is now their 11th year in a row without winning that. So, after all the pain I don't know if you know this. I know you know this because we've both been fans of the Texans for the duration, but the pain of going to Indianapolis for like the first 15 years that the franchise existed, watching the Texans go to Indianapolis, knowing that even if it was Dan Orlovsky playing quarterback for the Colts, that you were helpless to win a game in Indianapolis. It's just wild. I mean, I was at the first game the Texans went against the Colts in Reliant Stadium. I'm going to call it Reliant Stadium. That's what it was in 2006 on Christmas Eve. And that was quite the show. It was nice to be there. But with that, I guess we'll bring this to a close. As always, thanks for tuning in. You can find us wherever you find your podcasts if you want to listen, and if you prefer to watch. I mean, I worked really hard on this background, Tom. I really put my blood, sweat, and tears into this thing, and so if you want to watch it on YouTube with this little ticker that's going across the bottom with all this cool information that I'm saying to you now, but you could most of it's on the ticker. You could read it. Then you can find us on YouTube. Just look up at James Roy NFL. And that's how you'll find the Bullpen's YouTube page, because that's where it is at. I have been James Roy. You can find me at James Roy NFL on Twitter and at N1 Texans Fan on Instagram. Tom is at TCTom1 on Instagram, and he is at Third Coast Tom on Twitter. And that's the best way to keep in touch. Another thing is that the Bullpen has Twitter and Instagram pages. And so you can look up at the Bullpen Cast, and you will be directed to those pages. You can give them a follow if that would make you happy. So thanks for listening. As always, stay classy, Houston, and vamos Texans. Thanks for tuning into The Bullpen, a Texans podcast. Please like, comment, subscribe, and follow along for more Texans talk from The Bullpen.
Take the handoff. Stroud looking.